I don't know any mainstream biblical scholars that would try to associate a particular Pharaoh with Moses in anything other than a funsies thought experiment sort of way, and that's for two reasons. Number one, there isn't good historical evidence for the existence of Moses. The sources that we have that narrate and detail his life are composed centuries after any of the times in which he was supposed to have lived. That's bad. Those sources frequently contradict each other. That's also bad. And those sources are chock full of legendary or otherwise ahistorical information that we know to be false. That's also bad. So you add up three bad things and you don't get good evidence for Moses' existence. Mainstream biblical scholars who are willing to grant the existence of some dude named Moses usually do so out of deference to the fact that there are some aspects of his character that would be very inconvenient for an ancient author to invent out of whole cloth. For example, Moses is obviously a very Egyptian character. He comes out of an Egyptian context, has an Egyptian name, has ties to Egyptian royalty. That would be inconvenient for an author in ancient Israel to invent because Egypt was Israel's oppressor for so many centuries. You would prefer to invent a native born character. Also, generally speaking, when ancient authors invent legendary characters, they invent legendary characters who have strong ties to or outright founded key cultural institutions that are still ongoing in the author's day. So, for example, it's not uncommon to see stories invented about legendary first conquerors and kings, but Moses isn't that. Saul and David might be that, but Moses isn't that. Or you might see the invention of legendary figures tied to the cult, to the priesthood, or to a particular temple. But Moses isn't that either. Aaron is that. Solomon is that in First Kings. David is sort of that again with the founding of the temple. In First Chronicles, there's a bit of a difference there. But either way, Moses isn't any of those figures. Moses is a prophet and a lawgiver and a liberator, but not really the founder of a key cultural institution that's ongoing in the author's day. But these inconveniences aren't great pieces of historical evidence, so while you will find some mainstream biblical scholars who will be like, yeah, I guess maybe somebody like that existed, you'll find just as many who are just say no outright. The second major reason why you won't find mainstream biblical scholars associating a particular Pharaoh with Moses in anything other than a thought experiment sort of way is because even if we take the Bible to be true, the inerrant Word of God, that doesn't actually get us any closer to establishing which Pharaoh we should associate with Moses, because the Bible contradicts itself on when the Exodus took place and when Moses was supposed to have lived. For example, 1 Kings 6 is very clear that the Exodus took place 480 years before the construction of the temple in Jerusalem in the 10th century BCE, which would put the Exodus in the middle of the 15th century BCE. And if that's the case, then that would probably be associated with Pharaoh Thutmose III, who did, incidentally, campaign in the land of Canaan with a host of chariotry at his command, so at least that element of the story would sort of vaguely, abstractly match up with the Exodus story that we have. But Exodus 1 is also very clear that the generation before the Exodus was involved in the construction of the storehouse cities of Pithom and Ramses, which are real cities that were built in the middle of the 13th century BCE, in which case that pharaoh would be Pharaoh Ramses II. The Bible is actually quite ambiguous about the specific date and timing of the Exodus, how long the people were in Egypt, the number of generations. We have differing genealogies that imply different times for the life of Moses. We have variations between different languages. The Greek manuscripts will say one thing, Hebrew manuscripts will say something else. The book of Judges and the story of Jephthah seem to imply something else entirely. If we add the New Testament to the mix, the book of Acts has an entirely different way of reckoning the timing of the Exodus. And so it's very difficult looking at biblical sources, even if we take them to be true, and they contradict each other, so that's hard. But even if we were to take these to be true, that doesn't get us any closer to knowing which Pharaoh this is. Second part of the question, does that Pharaoh acknowledge that Moses was adopted by his daughter and raised in an Egyptian court? Very easy answer to this. No, there are no Egyptian records of the Exodus or of Moses in particular.